This is Abigail Smith, known to history as Abigail Adams, half of one of the most equal marriages in America's founding, held together by 54 years and over 1,100 surviving letters. You'd think she married into her own kind. Her mother's family, the Quincys, ranked among Massachusetts' most prominent. The truth was the opposite. John Adams was a country lawyer, no fortune, no name her parents respected. Her father dismissed the match outright. Defying him meant risking her place among the colony's best families. By every rule of New England, this courtship should have died quietly. It didn't. In 1764, she married him anyway. What that one choice built, a partnership, a nation not yet born, is still read today. Braintree, Massachusetts, 1759. John Adams is 24, a country lawyer riding circuit courts for small fees. He is a farmer's son who chose law over the pulpit his father wanted. No fortune of his own, no name that opens doors. A few miles off, in Weymouth, lives Abigail Smith. Her father is the town's minister. Her mother, Elizabeth, was born a Quincy, one of the most respected family names in colonial Massachusetts. Abigail is 14, and already reading everything she can find. The name Quincy meant something concrete in 1759. It meant land, and 3 generations of magistrates and colonels. It meant that when the time came, a Quincy granddaughter was expected to marry into a family of similar standing. John had none of that. A small farmhouse inherited from his father. A law license earned by his own study. No one else's money. In a world built on family names, his own barely registered outside Braintree. Abigail had no formal schooling at all. Girls of her class weren't sent to school. But she read everything in her father's and grandfather's libraries. Shakespeare, Milton, Locke, an education built in private, one borrowed book at a time. 1759. John rides to Weymouth with his friend Richard Cranch, courting Abigail's older sister. He meets the Smith girls that year, and in his diary is not impressed. Unremarkable, he calls them, nothing more. 2 worlds, a few miles apart. For 3 more years, nothing changes. 1762. John returns to Weymouth, and this time, something is different. Abigail is 19 now, sharp-tongued, unafraid to argue literature and politics with a man 5 years older than her. He starts writing to her under a joking pen name in a deliberately disguised hand. On the 4th of October 1762, he addresses a letter to Miss Adorable, the start of a habit that will last 40 years, writing everything down.
By the same token that the bearer hereof sat up with you last night, I hereby order you to give him as many kisses, and as many hours of your company after 9 o'clock, as he shall please to demand, and charge them to my account.
Her replies survive too. Teasing, confident, nothing like how a well-bred young woman was supposed to write to a suitor. It was, from the start, a conversation between equals on paper, even if the world outside the letters said otherwise. Her parents notice. Reverend Smith is not enthusiastic about the match. John feels the coolness, too. In his own account, years later, he calls his future father-in-law a crafty designing man. The feeling was not one-sided. Still, the courtship holds. Letters cross the few miles between Braintree and Weymouth almost every week. A relationship built as much on argument and ideas as on affection. Unusual for the time, between a man and the woman he intends to marry. By 1764, they know. Marriage is decided, against the quiet current of a family that had once expected better for their daughter. Reverend William Smith makes his doubts about John plain, in ways the whole parish can see. A country lawyer, with no land and no name, courting the minister's own daughter, not the match he had pictured for her. Abigail's mother has her own concern, John's manners. Not polished, not Quincy. Small objections, but real ones, the kind that decided who married whom in a world this small. The stakes were real on Abigail's side. Marrying beneath the family's expectations could cost her standing. In a society where a name like Quincy still opened doors, walking away from that currency was not a small thing to risk. For John, the stakes ran the other way. A wife from a more prominent family than his own. Every eye in Braintree would be watching whether an unproven young lawyer could actually provide for her. There was a larger wall neither of them could see past, the law itself. Once married, a woman's legal identity dissolved into her husband's. The colonists had a word for it: coverture. Whatever partnership they wanted to build, they would have to build it inside a legal system that did not recognize a wife as her husband's equal. On paper, marriage made her disappear. Still, the wedding date was set, October of 1764. Tradition and the fact that he was Weymouth's minister meant Abigail's own father would have to perform the ceremony himself. Whatever William Smith privately thought of his new son-in-law, he had one more thing to say about it, from his own pulpit, in front of everyone. On the wedding day, the 25th, 1764, Reverend Smith chose his own sermon text, a line about John the Baptist, from the Gospel of Luke. For John came neither eating bread nor drinking wine, a pointed joke wrapped in scripture, aimed at the groom's reputation. The story is often retold, though later tellings may have polished it further than the record can confirm. What the record does confirm? Whatever he thought of the match, William Smith married them himself, that day, with his own hands. She became Abigail Adams that day, by her own choice, against her family's better judgment. The newlyweds rode home together on a single horse, to a small farmhouse in Braintree John had inherited from his father. No carriage, no dowry announced in the papers, just the two of them and the road home. It was not the marriage her family had once imagined for a Quincy granddaughter. It was the one Abigail chose, with her eyes open to exactly what it would cost her. From the first months, John did something unusual for the era. He treated his wife's mind as an asset, not a threat. He asked her opinion. He wrote to her about his cases, about politics, about ideas he trusted no one else to argue with honestly. She answered in kind, with opinions of her own, unfiltered, on everything from Parliament to his own performance in the courtroom. Colonial Massachusetts had no word yet for what they were building. But the letters between them, thousands of them, eventually, would prove on paper that it existed. The cost arrived with the war. In 1774, John left for the Continental Congress in Philadelphia. Abigail stayed behind in Braintree, a few miles from a city about to fall under siege, and for most of the next decade, they would live apart more than together. Letters became the marriage's main form of contact. Abigail ran the farm, managed the accounts, and raised 4 children largely alone. Decisions no married woman of her class was expected to make without a husband's say-so, she simply made. In the summer of 1776, with British ships in the harbor and smallpox spreading through Boston, she made one more. She had herself and her children inoculated against the disease without waiting to ask John's permission first. That same spring, with John 400 miles away in Philadelphia helping draft the case for American independence, Abigail sat down and wrote him a letter that would outlive them both.
I long to hear that you have declared an independency. And by the way, in the new code of laws which I suppose it will be necessary for you to make, I desire you would remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. Do not put such unlimited power into the hands of the husbands. Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could. If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion, and will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation. That your sex are naturally tyrannical is a truth so thoroughly established as to admit of no dispute. But such of you as wish to be happy willingly give up the harsh title of master for the more tender and endearing one of friend. Why then not put it out of the power of the vicious and the lawless to use us with cruelty and indignity, with impunity? Men of sense in all ages abhor those customs which treat us only as the vassals of your sex. Regard us then as beings placed by Providence under your protection, and in imitation of the Supreme Being, make use of that power only for our happiness.
Braintree, in the spring of 1776, was not yet a place of speeches or statues. It was a farmhouse, a woman managing a household alone, and a page carried 400 miles by postwriter. But something in her voice on that page reached further than either of them could have known, asking, in the middle of a revolution about liberty, who exactly that liberty was for. His answer came 2 weeks later. By his own account, he was amused.
As to your extraordinary code of laws, I cannot but laugh. He called her so saucy that he wouldn't blot the line out.
He did not change a single law. In practice, nothing in the new nation's legal code moved because of her letter. Not that year, not for generations. The real defiance wasn't a law rewritten. It was a wife who insisted on being heard, and a husband who for 40 years never stopped writing back. But he kept the letter. He kept every one that followed for the next 40 years. The war didn't end their separations. It multiplied them. Between 1778 and 1788, Congress sent John to France, then the Netherlands, then Great Britain, chasing alliances and loans the young country needed to survive. For most of those 10 years, Abigail stayed in Massachusetts, raising their children and running the farm alone, waiting for letters that took months to cross the ocean. In the summer of 1784, after 5 years apart, Abigail finally crossed the Atlantic herself. On the 7th of August, she reunited with John in London. They set up a household together in Auteuil, outside Paris, the longest stretch of daily life they had shared since 1774. They came home in 1788. John became the nation's first vice president, then, in 1797, its second president. Abigail became the second first lady, still, by every account, his closest political advisor, reading dispatches and arguing policy at his side. In 1801, they retired together to Peacefield, their farmhouse in Quincy, the same patch of Massachusetts coastline where this had all started, nearly 40 years and well over 1,000 letters earlier. Abigail died at Peacefield on the 28th of October, 1818, of typhoid fever. She was 73. John survived her by 8 more years. He died on the 4th of July, 1826, 50 years to the day after the declaration he had helped write was adopted. His last words, by tradition, spoke of an old friend and rival. Thomas Jefferson still survives. He was wrong. Jefferson had died hours earlier, the same day, in Virginia. Theirs was never framed as a fairy tale. No throne changed hands. No law was rewritten in her name. What they built instead was something colonial Massachusetts had no name for yet, a marriage between equals, conducted almost entirely on paper. More than 1,100 of their letters survive today, held at the Massachusetts Historical Society, including the one, written in the spring of 1776, that asked a country not yet finished writing its laws to remember the ladies. History remembers John Adams as a founder. It's worth remembering Abigail too, not as his footnote, but as the other half of the argument. Follow for more true, impossible loves.